My name is Taylor, and this is my MFA exhibition. So before I get started into my contents, I do want to thank everyone for being here. You guys are such a huge support system of mine, classmates, professors, significant other, supervisor, friends. Just, I really, really appreciate everything you guys have done for me. This has probably been one of the most challenging things I've ever done. I'm not trying to get emotional, but it's gonna happen. Yeah, this was probably one of the most challenging things I've ever gone through, especially in the past year, just with different health issues, and it's been extremely difficult, but it's been one of the most eye-opening experiences, and I think I've grown so much as a designer, as a person, and as the show is titled, Redirection, I feel like as a designer, I've been redirected into a pathway that I feel is the most successful for me, and I don't think it could have happened if I didn't go through the process that I did for my research. So getting into my contents, this is going to just be kind of the layout of what the presentation is going to look like. So I'll introduce my research, where I started, where I ended up, because it's completely not even close to where I started. But that's the good part about all this. This is a critical, reflective process of mine as a designer, and I'll get more into it, but I will set up the research first, and then we'll kind of go into some projects. The first project I am going to go into is Redirection, the magazine. And that is the biggest, it's actually my thesis project. So that has been in production for probably the past year, if not longer. And that encompasses all of my main research and findings and the issues that I identified for my thesis. So we'll spend quite a bit of time on that project. And then we'll kind of circle around the gallery. We'll go into the color stories. Again, I'll go into further detail about those, but those will be behind you. And then I'll go into Bloomhouse, which is a campaign, and all of this, it'll all kind of come together, but it's a campaign project, a branding campaign project. And then lastly, I will introduce my food truck. My infamous food truck is probably one of my favorite projects, smaller projects. And then we'll have a Q&A, so if anybody has any questions, I also would love to hear your guys' thoughts if there's no questions, but maybe any sort of experiences if they're similar to mine. So first, this is kind of where everything started. So day one, 2 years ago when Jennifer and I met, I told her that I wanted to focus on disability and food access. At the time, it was nutrition, and that was a big no-no, so I have not used the word nutrition and disability in the same sentence in 2 years, until now. And then what that relationship looks like with design. So as I start out, disability is very complicated, it's messy, it's misunderstood, and I am among the guilty of misunderstanding disability, especially in the world of design. I had a very different perspective of what accessibility looked like in design, and so now it's completely changed, and I learned something every single week. And there was a big question, and unfortunately he can't be here, he's on sabbatical. One of my professors asked me about a year and a half ago, he said, what does success look like to you at the end of all this? And I sat there and looked at him and had no idea how to answer that question, and I felt like it stuck with me pretty much this entire time. And so when you add food access to disability, it becomes even more complicated, and it took me a while to realize that as a designer I can't solve the world's problems. It humbled me very quickly when I started to get into my research, my academic research and my readings. But what I did start to recognize, actually just this year, was that I can represent the different issues, patterns, themes, different systemic inequalities through representation of visual communication design, which is the projects that you actually see here in this gallery. Again, I can't solve any problems in disability with design, but I can use the knowledge and observation and research that I've done to represent different issues and patterns that I have found. So with reflection and constant redirection, I can now answer the question that was asked of me a year and a half ago, what does success look like? And I can answer, I have become more aware of my own ableist assumptions in design. And I'm very confident in that answer now. A year and a half ago, I wasn't so confident at all. So what was? So prior to my research, so I started out with my academic readings, and I did a case study at a facility called the Wabash Center. It's located on Greenbush. And I spent 2 months there. I visited about 2 to 3 times a week over the months of June and July of last year. And this is where I did observation. I grew all of my relationships with the disabled people there and the staff. I do refer to the disabled people as residents and day visitors just because that's how they're distinguished there. And so if I refer to them as that, just know that's who I'm talking about. But my initial plan was to basically go into this case study. I had a huge plan drawn out. I had a presentation that I presented to my entire committee, and pretty much before I even stepped into the doors of the Wabash Center, my plan was shut down. And at this point, I could have either changed where I was going, or I could have gone with it and let the research take its place. And again, this is the start of the redirection. So when I started this, I wanted to create my own methodology for young designers to basically follow. So I wanted to go and do field research. I had a plan to take the disabled people, the residents, and the day visitors on these grocery shopping trips, and we would identify different access problems. It was this huge plan. I had a whole thing. I won't go into every single detail of it, but it was a very drawn out plan, and in terms of disability, especially when you have a plan like that, it doesn't work out. So again, I was humbled very quickly, and my process was redirected. When we're speaking in terms of design, we have timelines, we have deadlines, we have expectations. And so that's what I soon realized, was that design itself was very ableist just in general. It has high expectations. It expects you to be very productive very quickly. So when you have different possible limitations and any sort of disability, it becomes very difficult very quickly. So kind of what is now, after taking a step back and completing my case study, I've now realized that my entire thesis process, it's been a time of reflection. It's been a time of rethinking what my principles and what my values are in design. And again, how design is impatient. It expects you to be fast, and issues with disability may not be solved through design, but again, can be represented. So if we can, we're going to kind of shift our focus behind you here. And this is my Redirection magazine, and what it is, it encompasses all of my research that I did at the Wabash Center. And I'll go through it in more detail as I kind of meander over there. But this tells my story of my reflection process and my research, and the 5 different issues or patterns or themes that I identified while I was there, and how I was able to develop projects out of it. I knew that creating a magazine would be the best way to tell the story of not just my research, but also the stories and experiences of the disabled people at the Wabash Center. So we're going to kind of shift in our seats here. And I do have some magazines here, examples, if you guys would like to flip through them. There is a QR code on the back, so if you would like to take out your phone and scan that QR code. Allison, I got you. I know Karen's been holding on to hers for a while.
I'll give it back.
You're fine. Yes, these are for display, so if we can put them back after flipping through them, that'd be great. So we are going to start at the bottom of the poster down on the left side, and that is the front cover. So this was a very challenging part, creating the front cover of my magazine. I really didn't know how I wanted to depict my process. So what you see is an abstract representation or a form of a wheelchair. And this is something that it's very stereotypical that we see a wheelchair used as representation of disability. So this was something that I wanted to kind of take matters into my own hands and form the different abstract shapes into the shape of a wheelchair. And just because a lot of the individuals that I got close to at the Wabash Center are wheelchair users. So going across, it goes into my contents, and then I go, just like I did, into my research background and kind of a little bit more about the Wabash Center and what they do. They serve and support people with disabilities within the local Lafayette community. So what they have is they have a day services program every single day that lasts from about 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. And they have people who live within the supported housing of the Wabash Center. They also have people who are just day visitors who still live with family that still come every single day. And they are mingled into the same quote-unquote classrooms. So different activities that they go through each day might be different coloring activities, might be different craft activities, cooking, just kind of really everything. And that's a lot of what my experiences or my issues that I identified came from. And so the 5 main issues or patterns that I identified first and foremost is community. There is a huge community aspect in a positive way there at the Wabash Center, and this is it's a really fun story if you can read through the magazine. The lunchtime there at the Wabash Center, it's a organized chaos, if you will. So my first day that I was there, I just kind of sat there, and everyone played a part in this time. Everyone played a part in getting prepared for lunch, getting people's meals ready, getting people's drinks ready. And this was something I think that is really valued there, because this is the only time where everyone gets to sit down and be together and eat together and talk about food access, and talk about the different things that I was there to talk about. So after community, we go into agency. What I mean by agency is decision making. Sometimes the lack of when it comes to disability and facilities like this. Again, there's more detail into it, but that was one of the issues that I identified. And then going into accountability and dependency and assistance. So kind of 2 different concepts, and then going into power and control. So all of these issues were identified kind of each day that I was there, and as I started to talk to everybody about food, as I talked to everyone about access, a lot of the failed plans that I had, I was wanting to go on grocery trips, I was wanting to again had this big plan and none of it happened. So there's actually a illustration in the magazine of these failed plans that I had. And then I go into, I was able to incorporate actually these projects into my magazine as well, because the issues that I identified were used as focal points to design these different projects. So I am going to point out just some different things up here at the top. Talking about the charts and illustrations, so it was a big conversation of how I was going to represent the different observation methods, the different systems and hierarchies within the Wabash Center, and I thought that illustrations and charts would be the most successful. Again, it's very organic, it's personal, So here, just on the far side, you see actually a very simplified map drawing of the Wabash Center. I had a 3-page packet given to me of this facility, which is absolutely insane. So I had to use the map for the first couple weeks to actually go through this facility every single day. And then the next illustration you see is the application process for these individuals to use City Bus Access. City Bus Access is a like sister transit, public transportation to City Bus. And so they have to go through a very extensive process and application that has to be signed by a doctor. It's a very, very complicated process, and people have actually been turned down because they are quote unquote not disabled enough to use this transit system. So moving on into the photos, so the different photos that you see, these are actually stock images. And I feel comfortable saying that I did use stock images throughout my magazine, but I wanted to point out that it was very complicated because when searching for the right photos to use to represent what I wanted to represent, I had to change my language, change different keywords. For example, instead of using the word disability, I had to use the word handicap. I had to use some terms that not necessarily fit within the language that I am trying to speak of disability and how I want to represent it. And then just some different design choices here. So I used different pull quotes. So here, the food they gave me was disgusting, yuck. So I wanted to point that out. And again, this was just some design decisions that I wanted to use as just to kind of point out some different things within the text. So you see I did use a little bit of typography exploration, so just using different colors and weights and sizes of things. And then getting into making sure to balance text. It was a huge process cutting down the text of my editorial. I think when I first put it in, it was over 40 to 45 pages, and so again, it was a huge design decision to actually cut down text to make sure that the pages looked balanced and kept things nice and precise and clean looking. So going into, as we're talking about design, I'm actually going to stand behind you guys, but if you want to shift and look at the posters behind you. So I know it's like a rotating circle here, but so these are color story posters. Hi. So these are color story posters. Color stories are basically they're stories told with color. So each one of these color palettes have a specific name according to the disabled person that is represented on each one of them. Each color is named specifically in terms of the theme of the palette, and what each color represents is a different characteristic or trait of the person that is on the poster. So the case study that I did with the Wabash Center, it was very limited. So as you'll notice, names are not used anywhere, actual photos of the disabled people are not used anywhere, and that's pretty common in that type of research, which was okay, but I was more than allowed to represent things through illustration, which gave me a great opportunity to do that through these posters. So each one of these individuals, again, not naming names, but there are 2 of these posters where the people on them actually chose the palette, and that was part of my case study, that was part of my research, and that kind of points to the concept of agency and decision making. So I gave them that option and choice of picking out the different palettes that they felt best represented their personality and their characteristic traits. And something that I really want to point out is that the colors visually depict their type of energy, their individuality, and I think that these were really special to create because as I look at them here, just standing here, I feel like I am sitting there with them, speaking to them. So if you guys want to take a closer look after we're done and read through the stories, I definitely encourage that, as they're all very specific and unique to the person that they're talking about. But talking about design here, so again, all these colors are very, very different, palettes are very different, but I think that they are beautifully created, and I think that they depict exactly what they should. And these are just some up here, same ones. Okay, going into Bloom House over here. So this is a garden campaign. So the Wabash Center, again, all of these projects are focused on the Wabash Center. They have a garden space right now, but it hasn't been used in about 3 years. And so I thought this was a good opportunity to create a branding campaign to get the local community involved and possibly help funding a space for this facility. A lot of times, facilities that serve disabled people don't have funding. They have to do different sorts of fundraising campaigns to have spaces like this, and so that is that's what Bloom House is. What Bloom House represents is the, again, agency in the space, also community, where the space won't be just designed for the disabled people at the Wabash Center. Obviously, the community will be able to be involved as well, and there's different things that can be incorporated as far as gardening skills, socializing, different things like that. So because this was a campaign project, there was different touch points or branding materials. So as you see, one of them is the promotional posters. Another one is a tote bag that all of these items would be given or handed away at promotional events. There's also a thank you card, a business card, and a promotional event video. If you want, again, after the presentation, these 2 boxes sitting here on these display tables, feel free to touch through them, smell them, just kind of really dig your hands in there. It's an accessible space, so I intended it to be used as one. So the reason why I chose to incorporate the material boxes or the sensory boxes is because sensory is a big thing in the realm of disability, and so with access, that's what I kind of wanted to incorporate in the gallery. And these are just some close-ups. So that's the tote bag. With the logo, I do have one nicely sitting here on the ground, but those are the promotional posters, the bag, and then a thank you card that we got to display here as well. Okay, the food truck. So this is another branding project. This is the center here. So there is a facility called New Hope in Marion, Indiana, similar to the Wabash Center. They also serve people with disabilities, but there's a difference there's a big difference that I recognize between New Hope and the Wabash Center was the different employment opportunities. So at the Wabash Center, they have a warehouse. It's a very controversial topic because a lot of facilities have warehouses like this. And what the work that they do in there is they place nails into grommets of panels that will be placed on the side of semi-trucks. So I spent 1 day in there. I say unfortunately, but fortunately, I didn't have a very positive experience in this place. But with New Hope, they have a food truck, and that serves as their employment opportunity. And they actually allowed me to do a rebranding, and I'll show the rebranding here in a second. But this is a great way to incorporate, again, socializing, cooking skills, just different types of learning opportunities. And so it's called Cheese and Thank You. I did keep the same title and just rebranded it a little bit and spiced it up. Again, we have another materials box. So if you want to kind of mess around, feel around with it, smell, that is a model of the food truck as well. And this was also incorporated with the menu. which is also there as well, and an apron. So I want to talk a little bit, before we wrap up here, the rebranding process. So on the left side is their current branding, and they allowed me to have access to these different images. And then this is the new branding here on the right side. And as you can see, it's the same process that I did with the posters, and say color design process, and being able to use the different images and descriptive words to basically develop the palette. So before I wrap up, again, I want to thank everybody, and this was, again, probably one of the toughest things I've ever done, but I am extremely happy with how things turned out, and I feel like I'm a way more confident designer than I was when I first started out. And I think I want to end it there. I feel like I've talked long enough. I'm a pretty natural talker when it comes to presentations. So if anybody has any questions or maybe wants to share any similar experiences, I'd love to hear them. But other than that, my part is done. So I'd love to hear from you guys. Yes?
Oh yeah, I'm shocked. Allison is shocked. So, as somebody who also comes out of an agency background,
Yeah.
I was really intrigued about the idea of doing your field research and talking to clients, essentially. So, how do you think this experience will change how you approach talking to clients, or even, I know you've got a position, a corporate position,
Yep.
but the in-house clients that you'll be working with?
I think what I'm going to take the most out of this experience is, I think, to listen more. As designers, I think we kind of tend to assume or expect what clients want. And again, we go into even probably a meeting before we sit down with the client and already expect what they want, what they're going to say. And that's exactly what I did before I stepped in there. Was I had a process, I had a plan, I assumed of how things were going to go. I had a very detailed timeline and deadlines of when things were going to happen. And I think with the new position, allowing that process to be a little bit more natural and letting that process take its form and take its place, and not assuming so much. Yes.
I had a question just about how did you choose the plants or flowers attached to each
Yeah,
other?
so the first one, I almost said her name, it almost slips over time. So the first one is a peony flower, and she wears dresses. She wore dresses every single day. Again, this was during the summer. But she wore very bright floral dresses, so it does not surprise me that she did pick that palette. And then the second one, she is a bit more reserved, so it's not as big of a flower, but it's still very, very beautiful. She's a very intelligent person, and I think that when I started using the flowers, they were used in representation, so you kind of think of flowers as these very beautiful forms, and they smell good, they look pretty, and they have beautiful colors. And I originally used them as a representation of the different systemic issues that come out of disability and how they bloom into more issues. And again, as I started out with disability is very complex, and it is a huge systemic, it's very broad. And so again, it was kind of the same process throughout the rest of the flower picking. So very intentional, and also played a huge role with the layouts with the colors. Any more questions?
How much of your work were you able to share with the Wabash Center? Were they receptive, I guess is the word I'm going for.
Yes, they were very receptive. And that's how a lot of my quotes and stuff came up in conversation. So the main director of the day services program that I worked with a lot, he, and I actually forgot to mention this at the very beginning, but it's just scrolling through their Facebook now, things have changed quite a bit, in a good way. So things moved very quickly there. And I even talk about it in the magazine, with Crip Time and disability. Things don't always move that quickly when it comes to change. So it was really nice to see that they now provide different opportunities, employment opportunities, and teaching them how to fill out interview forms and resume forms and different things like that. But it was difficult. I knew who I could be open with and who I couldn't, which again in a case study I think is kind of important to recognize that. But yes, most of the staff and directors and management were all very receptive of me being there and listened and asked me questions and talked to me quite a bit about what I was doing.
And that is one of the things that's sort of a caveat of doing field research is just your presence changes field research, because the idea of being observed and knowing that you're going to get feedback changes the situation. And so being able to be transparent about that, I like the fact that you were able to do that in this magazine.
That was a big, I could tell the first day during the lunchtime, that was kind of the first time that they started talking about food and their different experiences, especially the differences between the residents who lived with the Wabash Center and their experiences with food and food access with the staff, compared to the homemade meals that were brought for lunch, by the day visitors. And so it was very, very different, and it was interesting to hear someone talk about their favorite food was fettuccine from Olive Garden, and somebody else, has never been there. So it was very, very interesting to hear those different experiences and them talk about it.
This isn't a question, but I just love all your different font uses and the capitalization choices that you made for each. They just fit so well into your project.
Thank you. Thank you. They changed quite a bit.
I'm
they,
sure.
they changed quite a bit. They go along with the research, but yeah, thank you.
Can you tell us a little bit about some of the other work that's here? Is this yours too?
That girl right there. Her presentation is at noon tomorrow.
Well, then never mind.
Yep, her presentation is at noon tomorrow. So I definitely I know. She's like, oh my gosh, you're pointing me out. Yeah, I definitely recommend listening to her speak about her work as well. Not that if you want any more people there, but
Sorry. More the barrier, I say.
Taylor, I still remember, when we first met 3 years ago. And now, just by hearing your presentation on that, I keep thinking, Taylor, do you think you have changed as a designer?
absolutely. I remember coming in, I was the youngest in the art design program. I came right out of undergrad into grad school, and I questioned myself because I was actually only accepted into Purdue out of all the schools that I applied to. And so I questioned myself if I belonged in a graduate program. But I think that changed as I started my research. I drew a lot of confidence in myself, especially with the committee. So for who isn't my committee is Jennifer, David, and Lee, and then Steve as well. And so they have worked with me every single week, and it's been incredible. But yeah, I have definitely changed as a designer. I feel more confident talking about my work, and I think that helped me get my position was I was able to talk about my work, and I think that played a huge role in what projects were that I showed in my gallery. was which projects I was going to be able to talk confidently about and feel passionate about. And I can already talk, somebody's head off, so just wanted to go even longer with projects that I really love, so. Yeah, I definitely think I've changed. I think, I remember our first conversation when I used the word nutrition, and she goes, no. But I loved, as much as it was, as much difficult and challenging as it was, I absolutely loved it, and I don't know if I'd go back and do it again. I don't know if I'd go back and do it again, but.
Too soon.
But I absolutely love the process. And this was not a traditional thesis research by any means. I couldn't go through a proper IRB process. I didn't have surveys, anything like that. This was a very organic and natural process, and I think that's it was difficult to identify where things were going, again because of the constant change of reflection and redirecting and pivoting of research, but I think it ended up again exactly where I would be able to answer what a successful outcome looks like for me.
So what sparked your original interest in this topic?
What sparked it, so I did a project, would have been my first year, second year, and it was on disability, and I have 4 family members that I included, and so that is something that was very personal to me, and I think that my perspective of disability has always been shaped around their disabilities. So that's kind of what I always thought. And that's why I felt so passionate about it, because I felt like I knew so much. And I really didn't, but that's what originally sparked it, as well as a class with Jennifer. She taught a disability theory week, and that's was really what sparked my interest my first year. And I think I just grew really passionate about it. I've always been passionate about food and nutrition, but again, that process it changed very quickly for me. But that's kind of what sparked my interest in disability and food access and what that relationship looked like in design.
Are you able to share your job, like what direction, what type of design you'll be doing?
Yes. Yeah.
For them?
So I've always been in athletics, and that was another big reason why I did a magazine. Was I was falling out of love with my digital work. I didn't feel connected to it anymore, and I wanted something tangible to hold in my hand, something I could smell, something I could feel, something I could flip through, and that's why I chose to do a magazine. But my new work is for a third-party logistics company in Indy, and I didn't know it at the time, but I got hired into a management position, which I'm nervous about, but again, I think it's going to be a process similar to what I've kind of just gone through. A lot of changing of directions, and again, I'll probably be a completely different designer here come next year. So yeah, it's a big difference. I am a bit nervous about working in an industry that I've never worked in before, but I'm confident. I think I'll do great. Yeah. Well, if there's no more questions, I'd like to give a round of applause to my professors and everybody here. I know that they are very humble people, and they don't like to take credit for a lot of things, but you guys, seriously, I mean, this was a life-changing experience for me, so I really appreciate it.
And congratulations.
So very proud of what's showing.